This is the Breaker.News podcast for the week of July 27th, 2025. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of the Breaker.News and host of the Breaker.News podcast. Welcome to edition number 406. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support the Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. Hear from U.S. Senator Patty Murray and BC Premier David Eby. And on the Big Deal feature, what do governments of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Yukon, and Northwest Territories have in common with governments of Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and Alaska? They are all members of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, and they met in Bellevue, Washington from July 20th to 24th for their annual summit. They are all grappling with the impacts of Donald Trump's trade war. This week's guest is one of the summit attendees, former Penware President Barry Penner. Barry Penner was a BC Liberal cabinet minister from 2005 to 2011 as Minister of Environment, Aboriginal Relations, and Attorney General. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.News podcast. Barry, you were in Bellevue. What was the overarching mood in the room as legislators and others from around the region met for the first time since last summer when it was open season? People didn't know if it would be a Biden or Harris presidency or a Trump presidency. There were a lot of concerns about uncertainty last year, but now here we are in the summer of 2025. It's a Trump presidency for the second time, and a different Trump presidency, not as friendly to Canada, not as friendly to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, good to be back with you, Bob. And it's amazing how time has flown, but maybe not flown easily. It's been a choppy 6 or 7 months with lots of angst. And I think that kind of permeated the meeting rooms at the Penware conference. That's the acronym we use. We call it PNWER or Penware. Sometimes I'm called Penner from Penware because I've spent so much time with that group. It's a cause that I firmly support. My first meeting was in 1996, so almost 30 years ago. Gordon Campbell asked me to be our caucus's opposition representative to the organization about 4 or 5 years after it first got started. I can tell you the first meeting I went to, there were, if we had 50 people there, it was only because we were counting the hotel staff and the waitresses and the cleaners. It was a small group, but it's continued to build because people see the value in having cross-border relationships. So a very different mood this time than last year when it was held at Whistler. You're right. There was a lot of uncertainty about who would win the U.S. presidential election. I remember having a presentation from a U.S. pollster looking at various trends and themes and undercurrents. And at the time, we had just gone through Biden pulling out and Kamala Harris coming forward, and it looked like the Democrats had suddenly sprung into a lead. But I remember this pollster saying the underlying currents have not changed. And it was a real cautionary tale, I guess, if you were a Democrat, because he was saying that there's some strong currents working against the incumbent party. So that was a fairly prescient presentation. Just for your listeners' benefit, so they understand how it works, we get together in the mornings with what's called a plenary, a big breakfast meeting, and there's usually a major presentation by someone, so that everyone's hearing the same message. And then we break out into different themes or topics. Typically, there could be up to 3 or 4 sessions, easier for me to say, happening in what we call breakout rooms on individual topics, whether it's agriculture and forestry or energy. Usually lots of discussion about energy topics across the border, tourism. But then we all get together again at lunch for another presentation while we're eating, and then again disperse into 3 or 4 different groups. And it's up to you which theme or topic you want to pursue. It is content heavy. If anything, I've heard, it could be criticism, or you could call it, I guess, accolades. But people that come that have been to other conferences say, wow, this is really policy and content heavy compared to, other organizations I've gone to. Maybe I won't name them, but you'll have a breakfast, there'll be one or two speakers, and then people are off playing golf for the rest of the day. This is very much nose to the grindstone. We're serious about moving some issues forward, coming up with resolutions to take back to our respective state or provincial legislatures to work on issues directly, or to lobby our federal governments on both sides of the border for changes. The basic notion behind PENWAR, it started in 1991 with a late Senator Alan Bluchel, who I had the honor to get to know, just a wonderful man, U.S. citizen, but I forget the quirk, but he went to university at UBC, and that gave him a lifelong interest in what's happening with their Canadian cousins on the other side of the border, and realizing we have so many similarities, and yet we have subtle differences that we often don't recognize. And he really wanted to, use his time in the Washington State Legislature as a state senator to try and foster better relations and overcome challenges, and frankly, learn from each other. We work so often in silos, confronting often the very same issues, but we forget that others have also faced the same challenges and maybe come up with some workable solutions that we can borrow from. So basic concept is try not to reinvent the wheel if there's one available that we can pick up and take off with. So anyway, this meeting started with definitely some apprehension, I would say, a different mood in the crowd. And ahead of time, I had people asking me, are you really sure you're going to go? Including close friends and people I work with. Some of them said, if I was you, I wouldn't go across the border. Aren't you afraid of, because in this case, I drove across the border, went through the land crossing. What might happen given some of the horror stories we've heard? And I have to admit, I did give it some thought. I didn't go lightly, but I thought, and I think this explains why the people that were there did choose to go from the Canadian side of the border. If we're not there telling our story and giving our perspective on the impact of the tariffs and the belligerent tone coming from the White House, there's a good chance our American counterparts aren't going to know about it because they're busy with their own issues, and their media is focused on issues that are germane to their audience in the US. And unfortunately for our ego, that doesn't always mean a focus on what's happening, how Canada is reacting to what's emanating from the White House. So that's my theory, is constructive engagement's important with state legislators and business people, business leaders in the US, so they can hear it unfiltered from us about our perspective. So the BC government this year really did have a scaled back presence, I would say. Not many people from in fact, I don't know if there were any ministry staff. There were a couple of ministers. I think it's Brittany Anderson was there. Rick Luback, who had until a few days before the conference was BC's Minister of State for Trade. There was a cabinet shuffle, and he became the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence. He's a past PENWAR president, so his attendance is kind of expected, and so he was there. And in addition, Lana Popham, BC's Minister of Agriculture. She's long been keenly interested in PENWAR. I've seen her at many previous PENWAR summits through the years, and that kind of continuity is appreciated, and it's a positive indicator. But the rest of the BC government officials that you would normally see from different ministries, whether it would be agriculture or energy, tourism, they were not there, including BC Hydro, which was a bit unfortunate because we had an interesting, another one of these big sessions, the plenary on the first day, talking about cross-border energy challenges. And we had CEOs from Northwest Utilities, like Puget Sound Energy and others, talking about challenges that they're seeing, constraints, meaning shortages on both the natural gas side and the electrical side. And of course, BC Hydro is a significant player in the region. But again, I think because of Premier Eby's edict to reduce our travel to the United States. BC Hydro wasn't there. I presume that's the reason. I don't know that for a fact, but that would be my assumption. Anyhow, back to the ambassador's opening remarks. So everyone's congregating. We got 500 to 600 people, and that's right, compared to my first meeting when we didn't have 50, unless you counted hotel staff. We had 500 or 600 people in the room, and the ambassador got up, and a fellow named Professor Chris Sands, who I think is a professor at the Johns Hopkins University back in the Northeast US. He's an expert in Canada-US relations. This has been his academic career. He has briefed presidents, including, I found out, President Trump, prior to his meeting with Prime Minister Carney, his first meeting with him earlier this year. He was there to kind of introduce the US ambassador and try to make him feel comfortable and hopefully get a few issues out of the way. However, it didn't quite go according to plan. Professor Sands gave the ambassador an opportunity to kind of say the 51st state issue is well beyond us. But instead he said, well, you know, that's the president's issue, and you guys can complain about it if you want. But another way to look at it is no one else is being made that offer. So you could perceive that as a compliment. It's kind of what the ambassador was inferring, I think. And then he segued into how Canadians not traveling to the United States in the numbers we used to, or certain provinces banning the sale of alcohol from the United States, how that had been interpreted by the White House and the president as mean and nasty. And that was also in the context of how the trade negotiations are going right now on the tariffs, that Canada is a tough partner to negotiate with. And somehow in that context, he mentioned Canadians being perceived by the president as mean and nasty. That made news back in Canada, that component. Interestingly enough, and I think what happened is the Premier's office, they had, as I mentioned, there were 3 MLAs or ministers from BC that were present, and someone amongst their executive assistants that were traveling with them recorded it. And the Premier's office, I think, released an edited version of about a 40-minute dialogue between Professor Sands and the ambassador. And they just released that portion dealing with mean and nasty. And so therefore the comments around the 51st state did not make it into the Canadian media, because I don't think the Premier's office, shared that part of the recording, or maybe they didn't get it fully recorded. There are other interesting remarks as well, at least from a Canadian perspective, that I would think are noteworthy. It seemed to me that he spent more time dwelling on the F-35 reconsideration than I would have expected at a regional meeting where defense is not on our agenda. Military defense is not something that the U.S. states and Canadian provinces spend much time talking about.
Even though this isn't a Boeing contract, it is still, Seattle is still a major aerospace manufacturing center.
Yeah, fair comment. And I guess, and just using it a platform like we use Penwar to get a message to American influencers. I presume he was doing the same, speaking to the Canadian MLAs, ministers. And by the way, there were some MPs there, members of Parliament from Canada, and a significant number of, and I'm happy to see this, Canadian senators. I know our Senate, let me just get my little soapbox here for a moment. Our Senate is much derided, and they've done a lot to earn that, but it really is a vehicle for those that are interested in picking up an issue and becoming an expert. You have every opportunity to do that with resources if you are a Canadian senator. You can focus on specific issues because you don't have to worry about getting reelected. You can make yourself an expert on certain things, and if you do, you can have some outsized influence. And so I am happy to see that over the course of the last few years, there's been a core group of Canadian senators that are taking real interest in what they're learning at Penwar and bringing it back to Ottawa, and then using it in their conversations with ministers and bureaucrats and other members of Parliament both in the Senate and in the House of Commons. So that's, to me, that's a positive. So anyway, there was a noteworthy number of people from our parliament, part of the intergovernmental group, I think they call themselves, IGR. Or did I get that right? Anyway, intergovernmental group, and they were there listening to this message. So on the F-35 point, the ambassador said, you can do what you want to do, but keep in mind your country's already contributed a few $100 million. I think he said 200 million. That might be US, because I think in Canadian funds it's closer to 350 or 400 million. During the development of the F-35, Canada's part of a number of countries that were chipping in to the joint development process. And in return, Lockheed Martin, who is the prime contractor, they have a number of subcontracts with companies in Canada to supply certain components. So the ambassador dwelled quite a bit on these benefits we're getting with that there's some Canadian content in every F-35 purchased. And then he segued into saying, if you think Europe's a replacement, go right ahead. That's up to you, but good luck. And he pointed to lack of interoperability with US forces, how Canada is still part of NORAD, and how, in his view, NORAD's not going away, and that we need to take a long-term view, both going forward, but also looking back at our history, and that really Canada would be better served continuing to buy military equipment from the United States, because it would more seamlessly integrate into joint operations and so on, and bring us economic benefits. He did not mention the fact that the F-35 continues to suffer from very serious operational capability, just in terms of being ready. It's got very high maintenance needs, and that means expensive to maintain, not just to purchase, but to maintain. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting that he spent a fair bit of time, like I just did, talking about the F-35, which tells me that they genuinely are concerned that Canada might make a different decision and purchase perhaps the Swedish-built Gripen fighter, which is much less expensive, requires 1/5, I looked this up yesterday, Bob, 1/5 the amount of maintenance time per flight hour. And according to what the Swedish Air Force says, that their existing Gripens are ready to go 90% of the time, whereas the F-35 is ready and operable about 50% of the time. So major difference. Yes, the F-35 is much more sophisticated and advanced, but it's high maintenance. All those electronics need a lot of care. And of course, that means expense. So anyway, interesting decision awaits our federal government. I do think that's a real fork in the road, and it's going to be a tough choice for Prime Minister Carney and his cabinet.
Well, speaking of high maintenance, which is what this relationship between Canada and the United States has become under Trump 2.0. It didn't used to be high maintenance, but it has become high maintenance. And one of the big issues, risks, threats, and opportunities all in one is actually coming less than a year from now. And it involves Canada and the United States, mostly the United States. I'm talking about FIFA World Cup 26, where about 3/4 of the matches are in the United States, including the championship final. Canada and Mexico are junior partners, hosting about 25% of the matches together. And Vancouver and Toronto are two of the host cities north of the border. And Vancouver, of course, is very close to Seattle. And this is a major challenge and opportunity and risk for the whole region. And I understand there was a symposium on FIFA, and also wanted to find out if Ambassador Pete Hoekstra talked about FIFA himself. I mean, FIFA is something that's apparently near and dear to the heart of Donald Trump, who's trying to make it his party.
He did. The U.S. ambassador did speak about FIFA World Cup. He did mention that Donald Trump has, expressed enthusiasm for this event, and that he hoped that planning would continue seamlessly. And he did acknowledge that the Canadian-U.S. relationship is bruised, but he says we'll get over it. And that on this issue of working together, he said the officials, they're just task oriented. They'll work to do what's necessary to, improve the cross-border experience, and so that we don't have people waiting in lines. I think he said 5 hours he used that number for crossing the border. Let's all hope that that comes true. I have heard over the last few months, there has been concern expressed at the officials level about how this rancor at the top could impact planning, getting approvals, and direction for changes that the U.S. Officials might want to make to help facilitate things, easier flow across the border. So I think it is an open question, just how the current change in the Canada-U.S. relationship will filter down. And most people are hoping it won't make an operational difference, but as I mentioned, even I experience a bit of angst about what I would encounter driving across the land border, because I haven't done it since President Trump's been reelected until this last week or so. So I just imagine there will be other people also wondering in the back of their mind whether it's a prudent thing to take their chances crossing the border.
Hey, you were around the BC cabinet table in the years before and during the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics. Now you're out of politics, but still heavily involved in Pinware and looking at issues that affect Washington and British Columbia. But here, City of Vancouver, which is where the FIFA Secretariat is housed, as well as the provincial government, which runs BC Place Stadium, they're not doing a very good job of answering the questions about people's concerns, about whatever challenges there might be. And they're also not doing a very good job of trying to sell whatever benefits there might be.
I'm going to venture into speculative territory here. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but your question's a good one, comparing it to preparations for the 2010 games. I recall when I was a member of Premier Campbell's cabinet, we had several meetings, joint cabinet meetings between BC and Washington State in the run-up to the 2010 games. The Olympics weren't the only thing we talked about, but it definitely was one of them. And there was a fair degree of coordination at the state and provincial level. And again, because we had those joint cabinet meetings, it sent the signal to officials on both sides of the border, put your shoulder to the wheel here. This has the attention of the highest officials in those two jurisdictions to make it a success. I haven't seen maybe the same degree of that so far. And again, it could be complicated by this unfortunate downturn in the state of the federal relations between the two countries. And I think maybe we have a bit less control over how these games work than the Olympics. Although then again, as I say that, you think about the International Olympic Committee having incredible influence and power and not necessarily being the most transparent organization either. But it did seem like Vaniak, the organizing committee, was pretty tightly focused and really was getting stuff done. Well, I just can't measure. I don't have the same sense of what's happening right now in terms of preparing for FIFA. But, under John Furlong and the team that he assembled, there were some very, focused, highly capable people. And it was a multifaceted organizing effort, all types of things that they considered and worked on. So we don't quite have the same sense of the team that's behind organizing the FIFA games next year.
Where do you think we will be in 12 months? Where will Pinware be in 12 months?
Well, the annual summit, we know where that will be. That's scheduled to be in Edmonton next year. So typically we alternate between the Canada and US side of the border for holding the annual event. So this year it was in the US, it was in Bellevue, Washington. Last year it was in Whistler, and next year it will be in Edmonton. And what happens is the host jurisdiction has a lot of influence over the agenda, doesn't control it completely, but they tend to they step up their sponsorship and they say, well, look, if you hold a topic on this or that, then we'll increase our funding. So it does tend to influence to some degree the amount of time spent on certain topics. Given that it's going to be in Alberta, I predict we'll have lots of discussion around, even more discussion around energy topics. There'll be tours, I would expect, to the oil sands. I know it's happened before at Penwar summits, and that's the one time I've been to the oil sands was as a result of the a Penwar meeting I was attending at the time when I was an MLA. And it really is an eye opener to see this scope and the scale of what's happening in northern Alberta. So I expect we'll have lots of discussion around that. Agriculture, of course, as well is a big topic on the prairies. And as the U.S. ambassador said on Monday, he's hoping that we can get to an agreement on what's happening with these tariffs sooner rather than later, so that the healing can start. And I forget exactly how he put it, but the implication was the sooner we resolve this, the sooner we can start healing. I would agree with that, except for the president has shown a willingness to be unpredictable. And just because his name appears on an agreement doesn't mean that his negotiating has stopped. So, I would like to think that once if there is an agreement, that's now the end of the matter and we can get on with life. But we also thought that when he put a signature on the updated US, Canada, Mexico trade agreement, which he insisted upon, and he did sign it, but now in his second term, he's shown a willingness to completely disregard it by imposing tariffs and things. So I'd like to be hopeful that if we can settle the current issues around tariffs, that will put it to bed for the next 12 months or longer, like 4 years, 3.5 years. But based on experience, I'm not going to bet the farm on that.
Barry Penner, former president of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region and a British Columbia cabinet minister from 2005 to 2011.
And I will keep pushing for legislation to reassert Congress's power over tariff policy. It is beyond clear we cannot entrust this responsibility to a president who is toggling economic policies on and off like a kid with a joystick.
That is Patty Murray, the United States Senator from Washington State. On July 23rd, Murray hosted a Zoom conference for media in Washington and British Columbia. One of her guests was BC Premier David Eby. The topic was the Trump trade war and its impact on Washington and British Columbia. The neighbors are also some of the co-hosts for the FIFA World Cup next year, 7 matches in Vancouver and 6 matches in Seattle. Bob Mackin, theBreaker.news in Vancouver. For Premier Eby, you've encouraged British Columbians to boycott travel to the United States. You've ordered the government to avoid procuring goods and services from the United States. Yet you're keeping BC involved in the FIFA World Cup 26 and not exercising the force majeure clause in the contract. Now, 3/4 of the matches are in the U.S. It involves American sponsors such as Home Depot, Bank of America, McDonald's, and Coca-Cola, which all must be protected here in BC under the contract. And Donald Trump is a very enthusiastic supporter of FIFA and a close friend of Gianni Infantino, the president. So why keep BC involved in Donald Trump's party?
Well, I think World Cup enthusiasts around the world would be shocked to hear the World Cup described as Donald Trump's party. This is a celebration of soccer fans around the world of world-class soccer. We're thrilled to have games in British Columbia for soccer fans, and I know that my colleague Doug Ford in Ontario is excited about having games in Ontario. This is a great example of what I'm talking about in terms of minimizing impact on British Columbians and Canadians of our retaliation, and trying our best to get through this tariff war while sending a message. World Cup is going to bring about $1 billion in benefits to British Columbia. And we're excited about that. We're excited about world-class soccer coming here. And actually, one of the offers we've made is, given the actions of the president around deportations, arrests, extrajudicial deportations, and other concerns that people may have about crossing the border to the United States, we've offered to host additional games on short notice if a team is concerned about crossing the border into the U.S. and feels more comfortable coming to Canada.
Yeah, I've got a follow-up. Now, Vancouver has a hotel shortage. You don't have support yet from the federal government for all the federal services, including security and safety. And downtown Vancouver businesses now near BC Place, where there are going to be severe closures, are worried about being able to stay open because of those transportation and security barriers that might affect them economically. As well, the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition says it has been unable to get any meetings with provincial or Vancouver officials about FIFA and the impacts on the homeless and the poor that need to access services and go about their daily lives in Vancouver next year. They're also worried about civil liberties, which you used to be worried about. What do you say to the small businesses that are near BC Place that will be affected, that might be on the wrong side of a security fence and can't access their customers, their suppliers, that their staff can't access? And what do you say to the people, the people that advocate for the homeless and the poor in downtown Vancouver, whose lives will also be affected by this very large event, which is going to have very severe impacts from a transportation and security standpoint next year?
Well, BC has a proud history of hosting large events. This one is quite different from the Olympics, Bob. As you know, this is contained at a single venue. And we'll be working closely as a government with the businesses that are inside any security perimeters. What businesses in downtown Vancouver are going to see is a massive influx of visitors, of guests, of business. They are going to be overwhelmed with positive economic activity, which they definitely need in the environment that we're talking about and the challenges that our economy has faced as a result of the president's unilateral actions. This is positive economic news for the downtown BIA and for British Columbians, but we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that allows those businesses to be as successful as possible, which is why we'll work closely with them to ensure that that happens. In terms of people who are struggling in our province, and we continue to work to ensure that we're building the housing that people need, but also that there's a positive legacy coming out of the World Cup for lower income communities. Building sports fields across the province, ensuring that kids have the chance to participate in sports. And have that opportunity to celebrate the World Cup regardless of their economic circumstances. One of the great things about soccer is that regardless of a country's economic status, of the wealth that they have, it's something that's a sport that kids can play for relatively low cost, and we'll do our part to bring soccer to throughout the province as part of our celebration here in BC.
FIFA President Gianni Infantino with U.S. President Donald Trump on March 8th at the White House.
So we're here to create and to make the best show on the planet ever, and we'll do it together, Mr. President.
Oh, that's great. I love what he said, like 3 Super Bowls a day for a month. That's what it is.
That's what it is.
That's really amazing when you think of it. I've never heard that expressed. That's a lot. When we made this, it was made during my first term, and it was so sad because I said, can you imagine I'm not going to be president? And that's too bad. And then what happened is they rigged the election and I became president. So that was a good thing.
How do you see the World Cup playing out with the tensions you have with Canada and Mexico?
Oh, I think it's going to make it more exciting. Tension's a good thing.
Even for the World Cup?
Yeah, I think so. I think it makes it much more exciting.
On May 6th, Trump and Infantino at the White House.
In my first term, I negotiated the return of the World Cup to America, and now in my second term, I'll have the honor of hosting the World Cup. And next summer, we'll host the official 2026 World Cup tournament, where 48 national teams will compete in 78 matches right here in the USA.
We were actually, Mr. President, so happy that the World Cup 2026 will take place in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico.
Did you notice the way he said that? In the United States, Canada, Mexico. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Now it's time on the Breaker.News podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In focus, Taiwan.tw. German mayor apologizes after city suggests Taiwan's flag be removed. Thomas Kufen issued a formal apology to Taiwan on July 24th after a city official suggested that a property owner remove the national flag of the Republic of China from a building serving as Team Taiwan's relay station during the Universiade. A City Hall email incorrectly described Taiwan as a part of China and cited International University Sports Federation regulations banning the use of flags from Russia and Belarus. The Rhine-Ruhr Universiade runs until July 27th. In ABC News Australia, UK and Australia deepen AUKUS submarine pact with 50-year treaty. The United Kingdom and Australia will sign a new 5-decade treaty to cement the AUKUS submarine pact and bolster shipbuilding in both countries as the Trump administration continues to scrutinize the ambitious technology sharing deal. Top U.S. defense official Elbridge Colby, who is conducting the Trump administration's review, has previously voiced concern about the pact and suggested the U.S. may not be able to sell Virginia-class submarines to Australia in the 2030s without compromising its national security. In Hong Kong Free Press, new code of conduct for lawmakers to introduce meeting attendance requirements, tougher penalties. The new code of conduct states that Hong Kong legislators should attend meetings and actively and conscientiously participate in voting. Lawmakers must adhere to strict rules when declaring their interests, including those related to employment, election donations, sponsorships, and gifts, the code stipulates. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.News podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.News podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In Willamette Week, Columbia Sportswear sues Columbia University, alleging branded gear causes confusion. Columbia University was not selling sportswear in the 18th century, but it is now, and the branding causes confusion, Columbia Sportswear says. The university and the sportswear company thought they tackled the problem in 2023, Columbia Sportswear says, when they signed an agreement that allowed the university to sell Columbia emblazoned gear as long as it also featured some of the university's indicia, like the mascot, the word university, or 1754, the year it was founded. In Cascadia Daily News, immigration arrests surged last month in Washington. Arrests in June, more than 275, were at least double any month since President Donald Trump reclaimed the presidency in January. At the same time, the share of arrestees in Washington state with criminal records dropped sharply to less than one-third, according to Freedom of Information disclosures. From Inauguration Day to June 26th, the feds arrested 782 people, according to the Deportation Data Project. That's up from 581 in the same period last year. And check out theBreaker.News and bobmackin.substack.com for the stories behind these headlines. Exclusive. Documents bring FIFA World Cup 26 road closures into focus. And why is Premier David Eby keeping BC in Donald Trump's party? Read the stories behind the headlines. Go to theBreaker.News and bobmackin.substack.com. That's Cascadia Calling on this edition of the Breaker.News podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The Virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.News podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to vintage car collectors and automotive historians across British Columbia. July is Automotive Heritage Month and Collector Car Appreciation Month in BC. What's your favorite car? And you can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.News. That's it for the Breaker.News podcast for the week of July 27th, 2025. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 27th of July in 1921, biochemists Frederick Banting and Charles Best at the University of Toronto discovered insulin to treat diabetes? Now you know. Send me your feedback, send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.News. Bookmark theBreaker.News. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. And introducing bobmackin.substack.com. Sign up for the free email newsletter and get updates to your inbox, or follow The Breaker News for news as it happens on X, formerly Twitter. And You can support The Breaker for as little as $7 a month. For more information, go to bobmackin.substack.com. Until next week.